Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery, and I got a couple bins that need tending to, so I put together my little checklist like I've been doing lately. And let me just give you a quick rundown on what we got going on here. There's a tub up here on the upper left-hand corner. It's called a finishing tub on my list. I treat that as a container full of castings that have already been harvested out of a bin that has finished its life cycle. So the material in that bin was composted over I don't know how many months, and then when I harvested the castings, it turned into a finishing tub in order to allow any sort of cocoons that may have been deposited into that material to hatch out, and then give those worms a chance to get reclaimed and stay in my wormery as opposed to being used as compost outside in the yard. So in that case, we've been trying to get the worms out of that material for a while now, and any worms that we pull out of there are going to be put into the newest of my bins down here at the bottom of the list. It's a 22-day-old bin, and I don't know what to expect there, you know. Hopefully the castings are nearly depopulated of worms. Hopefully we don't have to reload the feeding zone. And at that point, maybe we can actually consider that finishing tub as done. So we'll see once we actually get in there and start looking around. But the next one down here is still an active tub. This is a 99-day-old composting tub, which actually over the past 30 days has been winding down. Been trying to bait the worms out of that material using this horizontal migration method. And whatever worms we pull out of there are also going to be going into this newest of my bins. And, you know, we've been keeping track of how many worms we put into this newest tub of mine. I've never really done much in terms of trying to estimate the numbers of worms, but each time we put worms into this newest of my bins, we've been weighing them. And we'll do the same today, just to come up with a rough estimate of how many we've got in there. And I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,500 worms in this bin. And depending on how many we get in there, we could easily push ourselves over the 4,000 count in terms of population in that bin. That'll probably be the last loading of worms into that bin, so as not to overload the bin. At that point, I'll probably have to set up a new tub and get that started, so I've got a place to put ongoing worm migrations. So that's what I'm after here today. So let's get to work. We're going to obviously start these here, and we'll work our way to this one so that we can release the worms at the end. So I'm most interested in seeing what the deal is with this finishing tub. Hopefully the material is evacuated and the material can be considered as finished. And then we'll be done with that one. So let's get to work. Alright, so my finishing tub here, like I said earlier, was set up with the horizontal migration, trying to encourage the worms to make their way over to here, and this side of it is where the finished castings are. Covered with a very thin piece of paper, attempting to allow for evaporation to occur and let the material dry out a little bit. So I'm going to check this stuff out here, see what it feels like. Definitely feels pretty moist, perhaps a little moist than we would want it to be. So initial impressions of the material is that it could probably stand to evaporate and dry out a little bit longer. I am definitely spotting cocoons here and there throughout the material, and they're all fairly dark in color. It's kind of attached to a big chunk of compost, so I'm not sure how easy it is to see. It's right here on the tip of my thumb. This little cocoon is pretty dark in color. Probably not too long before it hatches out. And as I start just carefully looking around, I could see a lot of them, and they're all very dark in color. There's a pretty dark one. There's another pretty dark one. There's another dark one. Oh, they're all over the place. And it makes me wonder, after 69 days, how is it that these cocoons would not have hatched yet? I thought that when it comes to red wiggler cocoons, their average time to hatch is something in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, we're talking well over twice that now. I mean, it doesn't seem like any of these cocoons were freshly deposited into the bin because they're all very dark in color. Or maybe worm cocoons don't all hatch. Maybe they're just like ones that didn't properly get fertilized, and maybe they'll turn dark in color but not hatch. That's something I don't know. One thing I'm definitely also seeing as we go through here is pretty good numbers of little itsy bitsy tiny worms all over the place. I don't think I've seen a regular full-size worm yet, but we've definitely seen a whole bunch of little tiny ones, or at least I've seen a bunch of tiny ones. You probably did too as I was rummaging through this material. So I think the presence of a lot of little baby worms all over the place, as well as what appears to be a lot of cocoons that are still on the verge of getting ready to hatch out, that would suggest to me that if we left this bin to go a little bit longer, then we're probably still going to have a number of worms continuing to emerge out of their cocoons over the next few weeks. I just don't know how long to wait, you know? It's summertime here. It's July. It's fairly warm, so I would think that we're in the ideal temperatures for cocoons to hatch out in the average expected period of time that they normally take, 3 to 4 weeks, unless I'm just not educated correctly on what the actual time is. So I believe, as tempting as it is to just consider this as a tub of finished compost, I think just by definition it isn't, because it's just teeming with little itsy bitsy baby worms who are probably more than happy to continue staying out here in this material because it is damp enough to be cozy and comfortable for the worms. And it's almost certainly loaded with tons of food that they can continue to eat. So I'm sure that the feeding zone that I set up was also a nice tempting place for them to be. But unless the space that they're in is, for whatever reason, repelling them, there usually isn't really a lot of motivation for them to exit the material. So that's my main reason for wanting to jostle up all this material, get the more damp stuff up to the surface, give it a greater opportunity to be able to evaporate, dry out a little bit, and then hopefully make the material a little bit less cozy for the worms, inspire them to go hunting for a more comfortable place to be. Again, I don't know if the camera is seeing it, but all over the place, everywhere I look, I just see cocoons all over the place, suggesting to me that there's still a huge amount of potential in this bin for, hatchlings to emerge and continue to populate this material. So I believe what we're going to do is we're going to just do a haul. We're going to haul out whatever worms made their way over into this feeding zone so that we can release them into the newest of my bins, into that 22-day-old bin. And once we finish, we'll go ahead and we'll just reset this feeding zone here to try to encourage more worms to come on over and join the party. And I'm even thinking maybe it would make good sense to not put that piece of paper back on top, just in case it's inhibiting the evaporation of the material over on this side. The material might benefit from being just open to the air to allow it to evaporate more readily. But I think that this stirring up also helps a lot, just to get little air pockets throughout, get the more damp stuff up top, get the drier stuff mixed into the damp stuff, try to equalize the moisture in the bin. So I'm going to haul out the worms that have assembled over here in this feeding zone, and we'll reset, and we'll give this a little bit more time to continue. So let me go fetch that tray, and we'll get this out of here. Those plastic trays, we're going to put them after we scoop them out. So let's get that going here. Maybe we'll even catch a glimpse of how many worms we've got here as we're doing this. There's a lot of uncomposted stuff in here, I can see. A lot of dry stuff. Mostly leafy matter. Oh, some worms over here in the corner too. Make sure we get them all. This is, after all, an evacuation, so we want to get as many worms as possible out of here. Here we've got some more mature worms hanging out in this material. These even have their full features on them, so they're mature enough worms that they could be breeding. So even though my expectation was that we've got mostly little baby worms to be removed from this container, I'm also aware of the fact that when I harvested this batch of castings, I was not overly critical of getting all of the worms out. So I do know that a lot of them probably remained in the material when I harvested and just went along for the ride. But the ones that are pretty big are in fact nice, very nice size, I gotta say. Pretty thick. I think that might have something to do with the fact that, you know, worms grow to different sizes depending on the environment that they're occupying. And I could be wrong. I thought I heard something though that says that if they're in a space where they're not trying to share space with a whole bunch of other worms, then that'll enable them to grow to larger and larger sizes, whereas if lots and lots of worms are crammed into a really tight space, then they'll tend to stay a little bit smaller. So a lot of times I just repeat things that I've seen or heard. I could be completely wrong. So we're just gonna set this aside, reset what we had going on here as far as bait or feeding zone, and then we'll put this back on the shelf and let it continue. So to start, we're just going to drop in some dry leaves, sort of a bedding foundation for the feeding zone. On top of that, I got an assortment of different things to place in here, different types of fruits. Here we have a banana, watermelon, peaches, mango skins, cantaloupe, and more of the same. So that should make for a pretty appealing place, virtually irresistible as far as worms are concerned. I'm also going to place in a little bit of crushed eggshell, which is what I use as my grit in my worm bins. Try to avoid that dust though. If you're using this stuff, don't breathe that in. And I guess we're going to just start gradually starting to backfill this here by bringing the finished compost right up over to the edge of it. I guess we'll use the compost to try to push it up a bit over here. Okay, not bad. I guess we'll use these again to cover up with at the end. Let's see how we can level things off here. I really hope this stuff starts drying out a little bit better soon. It'd be nice if all these worms were to hatch out and start making their way over for the delicious summer fruit. But at some point I might just decide to cut it off and say, you know, enough is enough. If I end up putting my castings into storage full of worms, so be it. They'll probably be more than content in there. There's usually plenty of stuff that they can continue to eat within the material, even if you're not feeding them. I think we got a pretty good level here. I think before we put that cardboard back down, though, we're going to maybe sprinkle the top of the food with maybe a little bit more leafy matter. I would typically use some coffee at this point to cover up the food, but I don't really have any right now. I believe I used the last of my used coffee in yesterday's worm feedings. So today we're just going to be covering up with some leaves. I just hope that this doesn't end up attracting all kinds of pests, you know, coming over for this melon over here underneath the leaves. But we will also replace the cardboard, which should help cover things a little bit as well. I mean, maybe the scent of it will continue to fill the surrounding air, but if it's deep enough, then I would think that most insects are not going to go burrowing down for it. Most flying insects, at least. Okay. And we've also got this piece of plastic that we've been using to just help promote the recirculation of moisture only over the feeding zone to make it even more tempting. Whereas no plastic coverings for the rest of it, just allowing for evaporation of the moisture in the material. Okay, so 69 days and counting. I wonder how long I'm going to keep going with this. And I'm looking at what we pulled out of here. So much of it looks like finished castings here, especially right on the top. So I'm inclined to start sprinkling that back down into the bin. I'm really trying to haul worms out of here, not finished compost. And over the past few minutes, most of the worms, I would hope, have sensed the light overhead and have proceeded to burrow down into this pile. But that'll be fine. I wonder how I'm going to be able to measure the number of worms in here. Typically I allow them to squirm down low and then I skim off the top of the pile, presumably leaving very few worms in what I've scraped off. So I might play with this a little bit off camera before we try to release them to try to minimize the amount of extra stuff that gets moved over other than the worms. Alright, I'm putting this thing back on the shelf. Let's move on. Alright, so now this is our 99-day-old bin. In here we have a very similar situation to what you saw earlier. It's a horizontal migration, attempting to lure the worms out of the material over into this side where we've got the feeding zones going on. I always try to carefully remove this plastic so as to not make a huge mess, but at the same time try to make sure I don't have any hitchhikers that I'm removing from the nice moist safety of the bin into a dry, dangerous place. Okay, now just a quick rewind here, back to the other bin that we finished with. You'll remember I had piled the entire feeding zone into this tray, and I proceeded to try to separate worms from castings and from other material in the interest of being able to get a weight. Just to put these guys on the scale and get a sense of how many I got. And I came, I would guess that I might have come about halfway through separating the worms. However, the material was just so wet and so sticky that I really couldn't make much of it. So I ended up taking that stuff outside to rest it out in the sun, let it dry. And while that's out there in the sun, it's a nice low humidity day. It's, I think, 40, 45, 42% humidity and sunny. So the material that was in here, with the exception of the real leafy matter and uneaten food, which I separated also, all that gooey wet compost that the worms are in, the other remainder of the worms are in, is outside, spread out in a real thin layer, exposed to the sun in the nice dry air, in the hopes that it'll dry off. And I did actually spend quite a bit of time outside fiddling around with it, playing around with it. And the one thing I did notice was that here and there you see a decent sized worm, but not many. The majority of them are itsy bitsy tiny tiny worms, which got me to thinking that, if I was going to put worms on a scale and then try to equate 1 pound of worms, or the equivalent of 1 pound of worms, to 1,000 count worms, well, I really think that if you're talking about a whole bunch of baby worms, then you're probably talking something in the neighborhood of 3 or 4 or 5, or I don't know how many times more worms for the same amount of weight. Because, if you compare the weight of a single worm to a baby worm, I would think that there's got to be orders of magnitude difference there. So in the interest of weighing it so that we can arrive at an estimated count on the worms, it got me thinking that it was almost a futile effort, because whatever number you come up with using that math is going to be severely short of the real numbers. So I just started thinking to myself, hey, the stuff down in the wormery, the camera, everything's all set up still. I had spent a good couple hours now outside fiddling around with this. And And I'm not complaining because I was having fun the whole while, looking for something I could lay them out in and finding a screen to cover it so I don't end up getting all kinds of bugs landing on there and doing who knows what. And, I tried multiple things to see if I can separate the worms out there a little bit further, but it seemed to me like the best bet was to just try to let the material dry out enough so that it can be handled in a traditional fashion as you would normally see light harvesting, so that you can have nice loose material, bright lights forcing the worms to dive down, and then giving yourself the ability to easily scrape off the few little bits of compost on the top layer that have already been evacuated, and then eventually working your way down to just amount of worms. So I just wanted to bring closure to this video a little bit prematurely than originally planned, because I just ended up taking way too much time on this outside, and it's still sort of an experiment in process right now to see how that material ends up in a few hours, or maybe not even that long, drying out in the sun. I felt bad for the worms, so I actually put an ice pack right beneath the tray that they're in right now, so that if it becomes extremely hot out there for them, they can dive down to get to the nice cool surface below, with the tray that they're in resting on top of an ice pack that I took out of the freezer. So I just wanted to give these little guys a break as well, because they've been sitting in this tray with pretty much nothing to take cover under for, like I said, a couple hours now. So I think I'm going to, for now, skip dealing with this bin, or I might just deal with it off camera if it seems sensible to do so. But if this material is just as damp and just as unwieldy as that other stuff was, then I'm just in for a whole bunch more of the same fun, which is really not that much fun actually. So I just figured I'd give these little guys a break and cut them loose into my newest bin as originally planned, sort of fast forwarding to the finish and skipping a whole bunch of the stuff that was supposed to get done in between. So why don't we let these poor little guys loose. I'll get my newest bin out here so we could drop them into there and get them out of this dry air, and I'm sure they'll be very thankful for that. And then at some point, I don't know, maybe we'll just end up skipping these trays for now, getting back to them another day when I've got more time. I've got a couple other things that I need to take care of, so I just got to bring closure to what's going on here. So let's proceed to that. Ooh, pretty cool, look at that. It's always fun opening up a tray where there's lots of worms hanging out on the top surface. Let me just try to knock off any little guys that are actually stuck to the cover here. A lot of little tiny worms on here. Almost impossible to see them. I'm going to do my best to return as many of them as I can see to the tray. Alright, it looks like we got them all. Oh, there's one more. Get these little guys back to a safe place and proceed to the matter at hand. So all we're going to do is drop these little guys in and let them get acclimated to their new home. I decided I'm not going to weigh them. I'm going to go by guesstimates. I'm going to guess that I've got, I don't know. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this, but I'm going to guesstimate 300 worms in here. Well, let's be a little more conservative. We'll make it 200. Because there are a lot of little tiny ones. Just making it that much harder to estimate what we're talking about here. So I'm going to consider that as 200 right there. And if I'm able to extract more of them out of those castings that I've got outside, then I'll do my best to try to estimate what I've got there. But for now, I think we've just gone ahead and we've added, let's say 200 worms to this bin at this point. So let's let them get cozy. Well, that was pretty quick. Looks like we've got a couple more 100 worms in our newest worm bin. So apologies, folks, for the abrupt end to the video and for falling short a little bit on the to-do list. But I've got other things that need my attention today, and at this point I do need to bring a close to this, and I've got a little bit more cleaning to do around here and putting things away before I can call it a day in the wormery. So I won't keep you around for that. I'll just take this as a chance to say thank you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate your company, and I appreciate you watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to the channel as well. That's really appreciated. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.